Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am your host, Blake Smith, and with me is my partner in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt.
Hi there. Wait a minute.
Usually I say, and Mr. Ryan Roberts. But, Shelley, you spoke to him. What the hell happened?
So Ryan, as helpful as he is, decided that in the airport bathroom on his way to Chicago for his birthday yearly trip, decides that this little lady who is trying to keep the bathrooms clean at the Chicago airport, she says, "Is everybody out? I need to come in." He says, yeah, everything's fine. I'll keep everybody out. And she's trying to change out all the toilet paper rolls, And so Brian's like, here, I'll help you, because he's a helpful motherfucker. And so he goes and he takes one from her and he goes to take off the old one, puts the new one on, and he's standing there and suddenly he's vexed by this very large toilet paper spool. And he decides at that moment is a good time to see if his penis fits inside of it. Well, the little lady became quite alarmed at the nice, helpful man in the bathroom deciding to whip it out and shove it in a toilet paper spindle. So the cops got called and he got put in airport jail.
Yeah, so.
I don't know what his obsession is with whipping it out.
I don't know what it is either.
I'm so over this.
So, but anyways, we've got him bailed out. He'll be back with us next week. So, in the meantime, we decided that we were going to try something a little bit different tonight. And
maybe better.
Oh, hey, careful. And instead of just leaving y'all with the two of us, we reached out to a fill-in special guest co-host for the evening. We are going to a surprise guest to be with us for the entire episode as one of our co-hosts. We're going to welcome to the stage. He is our wonderful friend, our favorite geek, the fake Ryan, Mr. Chad Wandell. What's up, Chad?
Hi, Mr. Chad Wandell. Hi. Give me a kiss. Either way.
Chad, thank you for filling in last minute tonight. We appreciate it.
Heck yeah.
How are you doing?
Doing good. That can't be the real story.
It's Ryan.
It's Ryan. You never know. So, God.
I don't know. I just go with what he says.
Oh my God.
So yes, Chad, again, thank you for filling in for Ryan tonight while we get him booked out of jail and get him back with us next week. We appreciate
I hope he got to see the concert. Well, I hope my credit card went through. It's been getting a lot of work out.
I was going to say, was it on his way there or on his way back?
On his way there.
Yeah. So.
Did it fit?
Well, I got the call about 4:30 in the afternoon. I think that it was, let's put it this way. He fit with plenty of room for leeway, okay?
I throwing a wrench down the hallway.
On that note, yes, we are. We are so glad y'all are joining us tonight. We're gonna be stuck with this crazy motherfucker all night long. But tonight, I'm super excited because I'm gonna be covering a topic that is a ghost story. That I love the way that this ends. It's got some funny moments in it, but it is about a haunting that took place in England. It's called the Hammersmith Ghost. Have either of y'all heard of this story?
No.
This is a story that I actually have heard of, but it has only been recently that I heard of it. And I was fascinated. And if you weren't going to do it, then I was. So I was very glad that you picked this topic.
I jumped on it because I heard it and I was like, wait a minute, this is one of those quirky, weird ones. I've got to cover this. This is a haunting that leads to a murder trial. So I'm just going to put that right out there at the beginning. And it ended up not being solved for close to 200 years. So I find this story quite interesting. But anyways, so with that, are y'all ready to jump into the Hammersmith Ghost?
Absolutely. Let's hear this story.
Freaking day. Oh, here comes Blake's British accent. Yes, it. Hello.
No, please don't. Please don't. We want them to stay for the entire story.
The year was 1803. No, I'm just kidding. The year was 1803. And the village of Hammersmith sat on the edge of London. It was the kind of place where the nights pressed heavy, the fog clung to the cobblestones, and oil lamps struggled to push back the dark. People walked quickly once the sun went down, eyes darting towards hedges and alleyways. Because in Hammersmith, there was a whisper. Whispers of something unholy moving through the streets. The stories always describe the same thing. A figure dressed in white, gliding silently through the mist. Some swore it was tall and skeletal. Others said its eyes glowed like coals. One man claimed it attacked him, choking the very breath from his lungs. Others swore it vanished into the darkness as though it were never there at all. Each encounter added fuel to the fire until the entire village believed they were being stalked by a specter. Now, this was no ordinary tale told around the fireplace. This was a haunting that grew so fierce it consumed a community. People stopped venturing out after dark. Patrols formed, armed with clubs, pistols, and muskets, men marching through the fog in search of a spirit they believed could strike at any moment. Fear hung over the streets like a shroud, and before long, the terror would take its toll. The fear in Hammersmith would not stay contained to whispers and shadows. It would boil over into tragedy. A pregnant woman would be dead. Shots would be fired. A ghost struck down. And a man would stand trial for murder. And the issues surrounding the case would not be settled for 180 years.
How you going to strike down a ghost?
That's the part that got me.
I mean, I've taken a swing and like I didn't connect.
That's the part that got me. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm fascinated. Continue on.
Uh-huh. Well, in the winter of 1803, Hammersmith stood as a village just outside of London, straddling the line between countryside and city. It lay along the north bank of the River Thames, with farmland stretching back from the water, narrow lanes winding between small homes, and the parish church rising as the central marker of the community. Though London was only a few miles away, Hammersmith felt removed from its constant motion. It had the atmosphere of a place apart, rural in spirit, but with the city always close enough to remind its people that they were not entirely cut off. By day, life followed a very steady rhythm. Barges moved along the river, carts rattled over the roads, and tradesmen carried their goods towards the city. Fields were busy with laborers, while shopkeepers and innkeepers tended to locals and travelers alike. It was a parish where neighbors knew one another by name, where news was passed easily, and where the routines of work and worship gave shape to the week. When night came, the rhythm changed. The carts disappeared, shutters were drawn tight, and the churchyard grew still. A faint glow from candles could be seen in windows, but once households settled in, the streets outside were left deserted. A few oil lamps flickered along the main lanes, but much of the village sank into obscurity. Mist from the Thames crept low across the ground, softening familiar outlines until barns, fences, and trees seemed blurred and unfamiliar. And it wasn't only the dimness that unsettled those who ventured out. It was the quiet, a silence so complete that a lone set of footsteps could echo unnaturally, carrying far down the road. The distant bark of a dog or the faint clatter of a cartwheel could drift through the fog, stripped of its source, making it seem as though unseen company moved nearby. For those walking home in the dark, the world shrank to the weak glow of a lantern, while everything beyond it dissolved into suggestion. Hammersmith was a community bound together by closeness, to the river, to the church, and to one another. People depended on word of mouth not only for company, but for information, and strange tales never stayed in a single household for long. Stories passed quickly, often changing in the telling, until rumor began to carry the weight of fact. And in a village where the nights were long and still, those stories had room to take root. It was in this setting that whispers of a haunting began to spread. And the people of Hammersmith believed they knew exactly why a ghost haunted their parish. From the first rumors, the story carried a darker explanation. Just 12 months prior, a man had taken his own life there by taking a knife to his throat. For that sin, his spirit could not rest. In early 19th century England, suicide was both a crime and a mortal sin. The church taught that a soul lost in such a way was denied peace, and the body itself was refused burial in consecrated ground. To the villagers, it seemed only natural that such a man would rise again, condemned to wander, restless and dangerous. But who this man was, no one can say. No records of his name have survived, and no grave has been traced. He exists now only as a shadow in the story, faceless, nameless, and defined not by his life, but by the violence of his death.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to stop you.
Go ahead.
So this guy basically unalived himself by cutting his own throat. They initially are thinking is this entity that is stalking Hammersmith.
They think that is the ghost that is haunting the parish because back then you could not be laid to rest in consecrated ground. You would not get peace. That was the belief if you took your own life. So they believe that this spirit was doomed to roam around restless and dangerous. So that's kind of where the root cause of the haunting.
But they never found a grave, and his name has not survived history.
At the time, they did not, let me put it this way. They didn't do a whole lot of research back then in the early 1800s, but through the years, there has been no research to connect, or documentation, to connect a name with the ghost story itself.
Okay, so this is our rumored ghost.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder if it was a crime, you'd think they would have recorded his name as, he committed the crime as suicide and it goes in the log.
Yeah.
At least in a church
you would
record.
think. Yeah.
Well, if it was also a criminal offense to commit suicide, I mean, like, they're not going to go throw his body in jail until it rots to death. But I mean, they would have had to have logged that or something, or his family would have had to pay a fine or something.
Yeah.
It's England. Somebody paid a tax on something.
Somebody paid something.
The government got their money. Yes, the English crown got their tax.
Yeah.
Anyway, so go ahead. I just want to clear up that this is who right now they think is.
This is who they think is haunting the parish. It's this man that took is the man that took his own life by slitting his throat.
I'm here for it.
Okay. Well, by December of 1803, the haunting in Hammersmith had taken a rhythm of its own. The villagers whispered that the ghost did not wander aimlessly, but kept to certain places and certain hours. Its presence was most often reported after midnight. What, Shelley?
Between 6 and 10, don't go in the lane because he's busy then. Yeah, okay. He keeps his own hours. Sorry, we're closed tonight. What the hell?
At the pub. Be back later.
That's right. I'll be back later, darling. Got to go get a pint.
Jesus. Well, its presence was most often reported after midnight, sometimes said to appear with eerie precision when the church bell struck 1. The figure was not seen in daylight, nor even in the early hours of evening, but in the deep cold of night when the lanes were empty and silence lay heavy across the village. The sightings clustered around familiar ground, the stretch of Black Lion Lane and the parish church of St. Paul's. At the time, the church was encircled by open fields and narrow dirt tracks, its graveyard bordered by hedges and worn footpaths. In the telling of the villagers, this was not by coincidence. The ghost was said to rise from the churchyard itself, climbing up from among the tombstones before slipping into the road. To them, this was proof of its identity, the restless spirit of a man who had cut his own throat and had been denied a Christian burial.
Wait, but he rose from the tombstones in
That's what I was thinking.
Hold on.
Cemetery. Go ahead.
Hold on. Where else would such a soul appear if not among the stones that marked the resting place of others? That's their thinking.
Got it.
I was going to say, let me get there.
He roamed around places he was not allowed to be or not buried in.
That's their whole thinking. He's not allowed to be there. We can't bury him, so this is where he appears.
Got it. Searching for that sanctuary. Yeah, that sanctuary that he was denied, that final resting place in a Christian burial, which would have been very important at that time. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the figure was described again and again in the same way. Large, white, draped as though in a flowing sheet. Sometimes it glided across the fields. Other times it seemed to loom up suddenly from the roadside, blindingly pale even in the thickest fog. To travelers, it was not only a sight, but an experience. The feeling of dread falling over them, the breath catching in their throats, the urge to flee before the figure reached them. Stories carried from house to house until they became part of the fabric of the village. As the days of December 1803 passed, those stories grew harder to dismiss. One of the most unsettling encounters came from a brewer's servant named Thomas Groom. He had been walking through the churchyard late one night with a companion, the two of them cutting across the familiar path beneath the looming stones. The air was heavy with mist, the church bell having already tolled midnight, when Groom said something stirred ahead. From behind the tombstone, a figure suddenly rose. Tall, pale, and silent, it appeared without warning, draped as though in a shroud. Before Groom could react, it lunged. The thing seized him by the throat, its grip cold and unyielding. Groom struggled, gasping for air, clawing at its hands, hitting something soft, something like fabric. He later swore that he could feel the pressure around his neck, the strength of its grasp, proof to him that this was no trick of the imagination. His companion, struck with terror, lashed out with the only weapon at hand, a stick he carried for the walk.
So you got some motherfucker in a sheet and it's soft, and he's got a stick, because a stick will ward off a ghost. We know that. That is factual.
Gotta be my favorite part of the story, because I just see this companion like, I'm done! With his stick.
Isn't
It's
that right,
probably
Chad?
only like
Chad?
a foot long.
I mean,
Chad, owner of the Old Park Hotel, a stick fights off ghosts, right? It's magical, right? Stick will do it?
I mean, sure.
If they're covered in a sheet, a
But
stick
here's
will
the
do
thing:
it.
if it was a walking stick, maybe it was more like a bow, like in karate, a bow versus like a go get your switch.
Yeah, true. It could have been an actual
Stick's
like, walking
a stick. If you swing it right, it's a weapon.
true.
So it doesn't
That's
matter.
I mean, it is true. I mean,
Yeah.
That's why they use them in martial arts. It hurts.
It hurts. All right, so we've beaten this sheet. That sounded dirty.
Well,
I heard it
hold
when I
on.
said it. With a stick.
Well, at once, the figure released Groom and vanished, dissolving into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. The servant staggered backwards, breathless, shaken, his heart pounding. When he later told his story, Groom insisted that this was no illusion. He had not merely seen a ghost, he had been touched by one. The pressing force on his throat convinced him beyond doubt that what haunted Hammersmith was not a shadow or a prankster, but something very real. Something that could lay hands on a man and nearly strangle the life out of him. Word of Groom's encounter spread quickly. Now, there was testimony of a ghost that could attack. And in a village already primed with fear, the idea of a spirit that laid hands on the living turned into alarm. Well, not long after Groom's chilling encounter in the churchyard, another story spread through the parish, one that shook both travelers and locals alike. Oh, this has got to be one of my favorites, sorry.
Oh, here it comes.
A wagoner was making his way along the road with a heavy load, his cart drawn by 8 horses and crowded with 16 passengers. It was late, and the road was quiet. The village was still under its winter hush when he claimed a pale figure suddenly appeared ahead. The ghost, he said, rose directly in the path of the wagon, white and towering, gliding as though it crossed the earth without touching it. At once, the horses panicked. They reared and snorted, refusing to take another step forward, their terror as striking as the apparition itself. The driver's nerve broke. Abandoning the reins, he leapt from the wagon and fled into the night, leaving behind his cargo, the horses, and 16 travelers.
He wasn't ready.
He wasn't ready.
That picture is freaking hilarious.
I know. Without seeing the specter themselves, these passengers were perplexed. All they saw was their driver running away into the night.
Oh, so
my
the people
God.
didn't see it. The people didn't see that picture?
No, they didn't.
That's a crazy sight to think about. Like, what the hell's going on? Like,
Well, 16 people
Yeah,
set
some dude go
stranded.
deuces and ran.
Well, 16 people set stranded in the road, watching their driver vanish while a team of animals quivered. The wagoner rushed to the nearby pub to gather help. But by the time the help came, the ghost had disappeared or suddenly it had arrived, leaving only confusion and fear in its wake. For villagers who heard this tale, the details of the horses mattered as much as the driver's terror. Animals, they believed, could not invent stories. Their fright was seen as undeniable proof that something unnatural stood on the road that night. If the wagoner's eyes could be doubted, the beast's fear could not. The sighting gave the Hammersmith Ghost even greater weight. It was not just lone travelers or watchmen who told of seeing it now, but entire groups of people who had been placed in danger by its sudden appearance. The idea that an apparition could bring 16 passengers to a halt in the middle of the road only deepened the conviction that Hammersmith was now under siege of something unearthly. Well, the ghost had frightened many, but until a particular night, its appearances had left only shaken nerves and sleepless households in their wake. That changed when tragedy touched a young, expectant mother, whose story became the most dreadful account told in Hammersmith. It was a cold evening around 10 o'clock when she made her way past the edge of St. Paul's churchyard. The village had quieted, but not gone still. A few homes still glowed faintly with candlelight, the muffled sounds of conversation drifting through cracks in the shutters. Yet the churchyard itself was silent, as if the graves kept their own breathless watch. She moved carefully along the path, the chill in the air biting at her skin, her thoughts no doubt already on the warmth of her home. Then, movement stirred between the tombstones. At first she thought it was a trick of the fog, the way the moonlight sometimes plays against stone. But the shape grew taller, clearer, rising slowly until it stood in full view, a pale, towering figure, spectral in form as though it had pulled itself from the very ground. Her heart raced. Instinct told her to flee, but terror rooted her where she stood. The figure advanced, not walking but gliding until it was upon her. A hand, ice cold and unearthly, reached toward her arm. That was enough to break her paralysis. She tore herself free and ran, her breath ragged, her feet pounding the earth. The lane stretched endlessly before her, yet every shadow seemed alive with pursuit. She did not make it far. The terror that surged through her veins was too much for her body to bear, and her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold ground, trembling and breathless. The earth was still damp beneath her, the night air pressing in heavy as she struggled to rise, but her strength was gone. She lay there, helpless, her body refusing to carry her another step. And hours passed. The lanes remained deserted, silent before the distant howl of the wind, until at last neighbors stumbled upon her. They found her still lying there, pale and motionless, the life drained from her face as if the very fear had stolen it away. And with urgency, they lifted her and carried her home, laying her in her bed, hoping rest and warmth would soothe her shaken spirit. But the terror had left its mark too deep. Though she was tended to, and though she was cared for, she never truly recovered from what she had endured that night. Within days, her condition worsened, and soon the villagers received the grim news. She was gone, and with her the unborn child she had carried. Now, for the villagers, this was the moment the haunting ceased to be a curiosity or a cruel prank. The ghost had not merely startled or chased. It had now claimed a life. From that night forward, every step through the lanes after sunset carried a new weight. Mothers warned children more sternly. Husbands insisted their wives not venture alone. And the men of the parish began to speak of vengeance.
So she, I'm sorry.
You're good.
So
Go ahead.
she literally was frightened to death, is what I'm understanding.
Yes, she was.
Well, I bet a lot of it was like because she was laying there for hours, though. She was exposure, like
It could have been, yes, but
and scared to death. I mean,
but the fact that she didn't make it too far and collapsed on the ground,
yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it was definitely the shock of.
So
of what
whatever
happened.
she saw was indeed frightening enough.
Yeah.
That not only was she paralyzed in fear. Now, how did we find out about the account of she felt like grab her? Was this her retelling in her weakened state? Was she telling
There are
this story?
several different sources as to where this story comes from. Some have said that it happened, that she became awake enough to tell what happened.
Okay.
Others put in a friend that was there with her. So it really depends which source you're reading, where this story actually comes from.
If she had a friend there with her, that friend sucked, leaving her there for hours. Fuck that friend.
That's why there's conflicting. There's why there's conflicting documentation of the story. I'm sure it's been added upon throughout the years and everything like that. But the core of it, with her seeing it collapsing and passing away from this, every one of those remained true through every single tell of it. So it just depends on what source you're reading.
But she did say at some point she conveyed that she was actually physically touched.
Yes, at some point there was a conveyance either from her or this supposed friend, if that's where this came from, that said she was physically touched. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the death of the young mother-to-be sent ripples of terror through Hammersmith. The villagers now had proof that the spirit was not only restless, but deadly. From that moment forward, fear became the language of the community. The streets emptied earlier each night. Families shuttered their windows, fastening them against the cold, not only for warmth, but in the hope of keeping the specter out. Men who once thought nothing of walking home from the tavern after closing time now lingered in groups, waiting for company before braving the lanes. Women, children, and the elderly seldom ventured outdoors after dark at all. In taverns, men gathered around tankards of ale, but the talk was always the same: where the ghost had last been seen, who had been startled on their way home, and what new details had surfaced. At the parish church, prayers lingered longer for protection from spirits. Even the farmers in the fields carried the tales with them as they worked, pausing to glance over their shoulders when the wind stirred the hedges. The ghost had become more than an apparition. It was a presence that shaped daily life. Though only a handful had ever truly seen it, every family in Hammersmith lived under its shadow. Fear hung over the village like a fog, seeping into homes and hearts alike, until it seemed there was no corner left untouched by its grip. As fear gripped the parish, the men of Hammersmith reached a breaking point. If the ghost could not be avoided, then it had to be confronted. It was no longer enough to hide behind shuttered windows or hurry home in groups. The ghost had taken a woman's life, and the men of Hammersmith resolved that something had to be done. Fear gave way to anger, and anger turned into action. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could muster: pistols, polished and loaded, clubs cut from heavy wood, even old swords carried down from family cabinets. These were not soldiers, but tradesmen, farmers, and shopkeepers, yet each one swore he would stand against the specter that had made prisoners of them all. What are you going to say, Shelley?
I was just going to say, what do they think they're going to do with a gun against a ghost?
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, we're going to find out.
Because
but it's one of those things. It's one of those things. How do you protect yourself from something that you
they go to
can't protect yourself from?
I'm really shocked, and maybe it happens later on, that the church hasn't been more involved in this.
Yeah. No, actually, I'll go ahead and get that away. No, the church itself is not more involved.
Huh.
No.
See, because
it's
you
really
would be
the
thinking
men
there would be
in the village.
Yeah, they're directly tied to this supposed haunting that you would think they would feel some obligation to step in and say, maybe it needs an exorcism. Maybe we need to bless the space. I mean, like, come on.
Maybe we need to put that man in consecrated ground in order to satiate that spirit.
Maybe he was
and make
murdered.
it calm down. You know, maybe we make an exception on this one.
Yeah.
Well,
especially when people start dying.
Well, you also got to think, though, because even in today's times, we know that the church has a hard time getting involved with hauntings or anything that they may see as a hoax or demonic stuff or anything like that. I think we're in the early 1800s at this point. They're going to be even less ready to be involved.
And superstition
at this
runs
point.
rampant.
Very superstition. We're still, the devil is alive. It's everywhere. He's going to get you, mentality. So it actually doesn't surprise me much that the church does not get involved.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, patrols soon became a nightly ritual. Small bands of men stalked the streets after dark, their lanterns swinging against the fog, their weapons ready. They walked the familiar lanes of Black Lion Road and the edges of the churchyard, hoping to flush out the ghost and drive it into the open. Some spoke of capturing it to prove once and for all what it was. Others admitted with little hesitation that if they had the chance, they would kill it. Make that make sense. Anyways, yet even armed, they faced a problem. Hammersmith was riddled with narrow paths, hedges, and cut-throughs that twisted out of sight. A figure could slip away in a dozen different directions before anyone could close the distance. The men often returned from their rounds weary and frustrated, their nerves raw from chasing shadows in the mist. Still, they returned to the streets night after night. The haunting had forced them into an uneasy transformation, from villagers to vigilantes. To them, Hammersmith was not merely haunted. It was under siege, and they had sworn to be its defenders. The armed bands did not have to wait long before they found what they sought. On several nights, men returned breathless, swearing they had seen the figure gliding across the road or vanishing into the hedges. Each account was delivered with the urgency of someone convinced they had brushed against the supernatural. One tale, however, spread further than all the rest. One evening, as the chill of winter pressed down on Hammersmith, a parish watchman walked his usual route. The ghost was said to haunt these lanes after midnight, and though many scoffed at the tales, he had seen enough shaken faces to take the stories seriously. His lantern cut a narrow tunnel of light through the darkness, throwing hedges and fences into sharp, angular shadows. It was then that he noticed a shape gliding along the edge of Black Lion Lane. The figure appeared tall, its outline pale and indistinct, moving with a silence that chilled him to the bone. And for a moment, he froze. It was one thing to hear tales over ale in a crowded room, but another to see with his own eyes what so many swore had brought them terror. His breath caught in his throat as he weighed his options. He could walk on, pretending he had seen nothing, and leave his parish to its fear. Yet something in him resisted. If he turned his back now, the specter would continue to torment Hammersmith unchallenged. So he steadied himself, clutched his lantern, and chose to act. And he gave chase. Boots pounded the frozen earth as he closed the distance, driven by a mix of dread and determination. But as he neared the figure, what happened unsettled him more than the sight itself. The phantom seemed to falter, then cast off its pale appearance in a sudden motion, as though peeling away its own ghostly skin. In an instant, the pale form disappeared, vanishing into the darkness beyond the hedges. The watchman stood in the lane, lantern trembling in his grasp. He had seen a ghost, he was sure of it, and yet he had watched it shed something unnatural before slipping into the night. Whether it was a spirit dissolving into shadow or some darker trick of flesh and blood, he could not say. The account divided the village. Some insisted the tale only proved what they had long believed, that the ghost was no ordinary spirit, but one with powers beyond their comprehension. Others, however, whispered that the watchman had seen through the illusion, that someone in Hammersmith was disguising themselves to terrify their neighbors. This suspicion did not ease the fear, and if anything, it made it worse. For if the ghost were a man, then he was one of them, hiding in plain sight, walking the same streets by day and that he haunted by night. Whether phantom or fraud, Hammersmith felt no safer. Fear now had two faces, and both stared back at the village from the darkness. Now, as the patrols stalked the lane, searching for an answer to the haunting, another man of the parish went about his life with little thought of the role he would soon play. He was no trickster, nor a vigilante. He was a tradesman, whose only mistake was in how he dressed. Thomas Millwood was a young bricklayer, no older than 22 or 23 years old. He lived in Hammersmith and earned his keep through honest, steady work. Now, those who knew him remembered him as a tradesman with calloused hands, shoulders marked by years of carrying stone, and a life built around routine. He was not a prankster nor a teller of tales, but a man who worked hard and kept close to his family. His sister, Anne, would later give testimony about him, proof that he was known in the village not as a rogue or a trickster, but as an ordinary working man. And like most bricklayers of the time, Thomas wore the clothing of his trade. White linen trousers, a white flannel waistcoat, a white long apron tied at the waist, and white shoes, all that caught the pale dust of mortar. When his clothes were freshly washed, they stood out even more, shining against the gloom of the lanes at night. And to neighbors already on edge, the sight of a man dressed in such stark white was enough to raise alarm. In fact, he had already been mistaken for the ghost on more than one occasion. Passing figures had called out in fright or turned to flee when they caught sight of him. Actually, I would love this, to walk down the lane and just be turned and somebody be like, "Ah!" and run away from me. That'd be great.
Okay, so this young man, he's going down this. So obviously he's going down this lane every night. Someone is obviously taking notice of him. He is dressed completely in white, even with white shoes. Now, that actually is different than the description that the gentleman before had given, where they said that it appeared to be gliding and that it did some kind of ghosty striptease and dropped its, white sheet or whatever and then vanished. Now, as a tradesman, he wouldn't have done that. He would have kept his apron on or whatever. But the previous reports of gliding.
Yeah.
Could that apron have given the appearance as it fluttered as he was walking to give him the appearance of gliding?
Depends on how long. Yeah, it was.
Depends on how long it was.
What did
maybe?
I just say? Hold on. What did I just
say? It could have been fog on the ground.
It could have been that. Oh, you know what? We are in England.
Walking through a low-lying fog.
Well, and it says it was a long apron tied at the waist.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was foggy, go ahead, Chad.
I was gonna say, for those that don't know, bricklayers usually wear long aprons so they can grab the front of it and carry bricks with it. So I don't know if you knew that.
I did not. I would think that would be a very heavy load to carry.
So, could the long apron give the illusion of gliding? Yes, absolutely. It probably
That's
could.
what I'm trying
Especially
to piece together.
if like he's got either like white shoes or overly white shoes because the mortar or something. Even if they weren't white, a lot of the sources describe them as white. But I'm sitting here thinking it's probably like the falling mortar that coated his shoes that turned them white. Yeah. So they probably weren't actually white, but because of all the mortar, they were white. They appeared white. So if you have white shoes, a long apron tied at the waist, yeah, it could give the illusion of gliding or floating.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is the gliding part. Go ahead, Chad.
Think about this too, though. Depending on what kind of bricks or stone he's working with, he could be covered in white Italian marble dust.
Could be.
Which is reflective in moonlight.
Well, that's a good point.
Just depends on what, depends on what he was working. Yeah. Well, his family worried these mistakes could lead to real danger. They urged him to put on a long coat or something dark to break the whiteness of his outfit whenever he went out after nightfall. Agreed. But Thomas often brushed off their concern. To him, his clothing was nothing unusual. It was simply the uniform of his work and nothing more. There was no reason for him to believe otherwise. He was not haunting the lanes nor trying to frighten his neighbors. He was a young man returning home from a day's labor, his white clothes marking him not as a phantom, but as a craftsman. Yet in a village wound tight with fear, that ordinary detail made him look almost indistinguishable from the terror that had already gripped Hammersmith. Well, the evening of January 3rd, 1804, settled cold and heavy over Hammersmith. The ghost stories had reached their fever pitch. Some nights had passed without a sighting, yet the silence felt more like waiting than peace. Villagers hurried indoors as the shadows deepened, leaving the lanes to the few who dared patrol him. And among these few was Francis Smith, a customs officer by trade. He had grown weary of the fear that had seized his parish and restless at the patrol's lack of success. That night, he decided to act alone. He armed himself with a flintlock rifle and set out into the dark. To him, the ghost was not just a tale. It was a threat that needed to be stopped. Whether out of duty or frustration, he resolved to be the man to end the terror. And the path he chose was Black Lion Lane, the very ground where so many claimed the ghost appeared. It was a narrow stretch, hemmed in by high hedges, its surface uneven and damp. In the dim light, a man could barely make out the opposite end, even though the lane was scarcely 4 yards wide. Every gust of wind stirred the branches and deepened the shadows, a setting fit for the stories that haunted the village. Then, ahead of him, a shape emerged. Pale, tall, and upright, it drifted against the darkness with a stillness that seemed unnatural. Smith's breath caught. His lantern flickered, throwing quick slices of light across the figure, but it gave no sound, no word, no sign of life beyond its steady movement. He raised his voice and shouted into the lane. "Damn you, who are you? Speak, or I'll shoot." The figure gave no roof. That was perfect timing for whoever's door slammed in the background just now.
Not me.
It was mine.
It said, "Stop or I'll shoot." Boom. That was not a gunshot. Sorry, that was just perfect timing. Well, it pressed on. Welcome to a live show, my friends. It pressed on, closing the distance, step by step. Smith's heart pounded harder. His voice rose again, sharper this time, carrying through the hedges. "Speak, damn you, who are you?" Still nothing. Only silence, and the steady advance of the figure through the darkness. Smith's pulse hammered. His knuckles tightened around the stock of his gun. This was it, the very specter that had haunted Hammersmith. The narrow lane gave no escape, no room for retreat, and it was coming closer. Too close. Smith's finger tightened on the trigger, and then the night split open. With a burst that shattered the quiet, the rifle piece fired. The blast rippled through the hedges, echoing down the lane, rolling outward into the village. Lanterns shook in their brackets. Dogs barked from behind closed doors. And for a heartbeat afterward, nothing moved. The smoke hung in the air, curling in ghostly tendrils around Smith's lantern light. And the figure had collapsed. A pale heap against the dirt road, still and heavy. In a nearby house, Anne Millwood startled. She had been sitting inside when the crack of the shot rang out, so close it rattled the windows. She hurried to the door, straining into the darkness, though the hedges gave her no view of the lane below. The sound had chilled her, for it was not the distant boom of musketry that sometimes drifted from London. It was here, in Hammersmith, just outside her own home. Others had heard it too. Doors opened, voices called into the night. Lanterns flared to life, their glow bobbing along the crooked paths as neighbors rushed to Black Lion Lane. They found Smith standing in the road, his gun still in hand, the smoke just beginning to clear. And there on the ground before him lay the body. Blood pooled dark into the dirt, soaking the white garments of the fallen figure. For a moment, no one breathed. The villagers leaned closer, lanterns trembling in their hands until the light revealed what the darkness had hidden. It was not the Hammersmith Ghost. It was Thomas Millwood. White bricklayer's clothes, the same garments that had already drawn whispers and false alarms, were now stained red. His head slumped, where the shot had torn through his mouth and out the back of his neck. At only 22, he lay lifeless in the same lanes where he had walked countless nights before. The crowd recoiled in horror. For weeks, they had sworn that if the ghost appeared, they would shoot it down without hesitation. Francis Smith had done exactly that. But instead of banishing a specter, he had ended the life of a neighbor. Millwood's body was lifted gently from the dirt, carried toward the Black Lion pub to be laid out in the nearest shelter. Shock rippled through the village, heavy and unescapable. The ghost had been fired upon, yes, but it was not the ghost that had fallen. It was a man of their own parish, a son, a brother, a bricklayer whose only crime was wearing the wrong clothes on the wrong night. The lane was crowded now, neighbors pressing close around the crime scene as whispers rippled through the dark. Shock clung to every face, yet even in that confusion, no one turned against Francis Smith. He stood among them, still holding his rifle, lantern light flickering against the strain etched in his features. Smith did not flee, and he did not protest. When confronted, he admitted what he had done. He told the gathering that he had called out twice, that the figure had pressed forward without reply, and that in his fear he believed it to be the ghost. His words carried no bravado, only the shaken tone of a man who realized too late what had happened. Constables soon arrived, and Smith offered himself without resistance. While Millwood's body was carried to the Black Lion pub to be laid out, Smith was escorted under guard. Those who walked him away later recalled that he seemed stunned more than defiant, speaking little except to repeat that he had thought it was the specter which had haunted Hammersmith for so long. Excuse me. The shooting could not simply be left as rumor and grief. By law, any sudden or violent death required a formal inquiry. In the days that followed Thomas Millwood's death, the law required that the circumstances be examined. Now, this was not yet a trial. In early 19th century England, sudden or violent deaths were first brought before a coroner's inquest, which was a local proceeding where witnesses gave their accounts and a jury did determine how the death had occurred. This was about cause, not guilt. So this is not a trial.
So kind of like a grand jury trial today. They
If you want to
present
call
the
it that,
evidence
yeah.
and they decide whether or not you need to go to trial. And it's just,
Yeah.
okay, time out. That is
Go ahead.
sad. This man is just doing his job. He's going home, even though his sister's been begging him, hey, wear something else. Change your clothes before you come home. You are someone that they're looking for, somebody or something that is blaringly ghostly white.
Right.
And he's like, nah, I'm fine.
Yeah,
And
I
he'd
mean-
even been mistaken for the ghost on other occasions, yet he continued to wear this. Go ahead, Chad.
I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, like, think about, in the times in the 70s, like Norwood Park, you're not going to go walking around in a clown suit.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, like the hunt's on for something like that. The least you could do is throw a coat on, a jacket on, or respond to somebody yelling at your ass.
Yeah.
Now, it is possible that if it was windy or something, maybe he did not hear the man.
Right.
Well,
You know,
we're actually going to get into that here in
Oh,
just a
okay.
little bit. Yeah, we're actually there's actually some
Okay.
testimony to that here in just a little bit.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
because we know that the shots were heard. Okay. Maybe he
Yes.
just did
Yeah.
not hear the man. Maybe that's why he didn't respond.
Yeah.
Okay, continue on.
Well, the chamber where the inquest was held was small, crowded with neighbors who still carried the shock of that winter night. Among the first to speak was Anne Millwood, Thomas's sister. Her role here was not to weigh motives or recount every sound she had heard, but to confirm what the parish already knew. Yes, the body lying in Black Lion Lane was her brother's. She described the clothing he had been wearing when he left the house, the same whites of his trade as a bricklayer. White trousers, white flannel waistcoat, white long apron, white shoes. Black Lion Lane was other villagers came forward to describe the place itself. Black Lion Lane was scarcely 4 yards wide, flanked by all hedges that swallowed any lantern light. On such a night, they said, a figure in white could appear spectral, unnatural. It was easy to see how fear and darkness had conspired to turn Thomas into something other than himself. When the testimonies were finished, the coroner delivered his ruling. His words were heavy. The act, he declared, was a quote from court documents, a rash act of willful murder. Francis Smith had fired a loaded gun into a figure whose identity he had not confirmed. Whatever his belief, the outcome was undeniable. A young man lay dead. The verdict left the chamber unsettled. Many understood the fear that had driven Smith. Some had even sworn themselves that the ghost appeared, it would be shot. But hearing the event reduced to the blunt language of law, stripped away excuses. Fear was not a defense. With that, the inquest closed. Thomas Millwood's death was recorded as murder, and Francis Smith was bound over to stand trial at the Old Bailey, where the matter would be judged in full.
Okay, so wait. So they just said, yeah, you know what? It's murder. And I don't disagree. It is murder. But Caden in the comments made a very good point. He said if he was a neighbor that always wore that, why would they move? Why would more people not realize that it was him? And I'm inclined to agree with that. If you see somebody every day, why would that startle you? To see the same person you've seen every day. Again, I know hysteria is going on.
You've got hysteria going on. It's at night. He's out there for a reason. He's hunting this thing. All of a sudden, you see something white on a lane. You can't really see. Your senses get heightened. Your fear goes up. Adrenaline's pumping. You think you got something. I mean,
yeah.
But either way, he's bound over for murder.
His brain may not be connecting all white Thomas Millwood. You know what I mean?
Right, but he violated two major rules of firearm safety. One, identify your target. And two, at no time did he ever claim that he was in fear of his own life or his own situation. He was just confronting something that had done nothing. So, I mean, it's not like he was running at him with a knife or I'm going to get you.
Yeah,
like none of that was happening. It was basically he shot a dude in the back.
Yeah, he basically did. Well, by 1804, the case of Francis Smith, by January of 1804, the case of Francis Smith had moved from a village chamber to the Old Bailey, London Central Criminal Court. What began as a haunting in Hammersmith was now a matter for the highest judges in the land, and the trial drew wide attention. The courtroom was crowded, filled with those eager to hear how the law would treat a man who claimed to have shot a ghost. Smith himself was a nervous figure in the dock, pale, subdued, nothing like a hardened criminal. He did not deny the act. He admitted he had fired the gun. His defense was simple. He had believed he was facing the phantom that had tormented his parish for weeks. Character witnesses stepped forward to vouch for him. They described Smith as gentle, mild-tempered, not the sort to turn violent unless gripped by real terror. They painted the picture of an ordinary man who had been swept up in extraordinary hysteria. Then came Anne Millwood, the sister of the deceased. Her presence shifted the room. She was not there to confirm the identity of her brother. She had already done that. Now, She was there to tell what she had heard the night he died. The court fell silent as she spoke. She described being at home when the events unfolded. First, she heard Smith's voice outside in the lane. He called out once, demanding to know who was there. Then again, louder, more urgent. And almost before the second call had finished echoing against the hedges, the gunshot rang out. Anne told the court there had been no real pause, no chance for her brother to answer. Her words painted the act not as a careful warning ignored, but as a shot fired in near instant fear.
So she confirmed that the man panicked
Mm-hmm.
and never waited for an answer from Thomas Millwood.
Nope.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, even if he did answer, if you've ever been in a high stress scenario like that, your adrenaline's pumping so hard, you're going boom, 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 boom.
He may not have heard.
He may have actually answered and it just didn't get heard.
Yep.
Okay.
And don't think that that's the end of this. No, there's a lot more to this case than just her saying, "Hey, here's what happened." Other villagers testified as well. They spoke again of the darkness of Black Lion Lane, the high hedges, the 4 feet wide, and in the right conditions, they too would be confused. Their accounts underscored the power of fear, but they did not erase the fact that the man was dead. At last, Lord Chief Baron Sir Archibald MacDonald addressed the jury. I know, mouthful.
Yeah, Shane.
They're English. Leave them alone.
His instructions were clear and merciless. However frightened Smith might have been, however convinced he was facing the Hammersmith Ghost, the law did not bend to imagination. Quote, "No man is allowed to kill another rashly," he told them. They must return one of 2 verdicts: guilty of murder or not guilty at all. Well, the jury withdrew to deliberate, their faces marked with unease and confusion. They had listened to Anne Millwood's grief, to the villagers' account of that dark lane, to Smith's quiet admission that he had pulled the trigger, believing in a phantom. Now they were charged with deciding his fate. When they returned, all eyes turned to them. The foreman rose, his voice steady but cautious. They had reached a verdict, he said, but not the one many expected. They found Francis Smith guilty, not of murder, but of manslaughter, a lesser crime. A verdict that seemed to balance the letter of the law with the reality of fear. And for a moment, the room seemed to breathe again. Manslaughter carried punishment, but it wasn't the gallows. But the reprieve lasted but just a minute. Lord Chief Baron MacDonald leaned forward from his bench, his expression grave, and shook his head. The law, he said, allowed for no such compromise. In this case, there could be no middle ground. Either Smith was guilty of murder or he was innocent. Nothing less, nothing between. The words fell heavy on the room. Murmurs spread through the gallery. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances, their relief evaporating. They had tried to spare the man, but the law itself had closed the door. Again, they filed out, shoulders weighed with the knowledge that whatever verdict they brought back, it would seal a man's fate. Well, time dragged as the court waited. When at last they returned, their faces were pale, their steps slow. The foreman's voice faltered as he delivered the words. Francis Smith was guilty of murder. And the courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries, disbelief. Some sat stunned into silence. Others shook their heads in horror. It was one thing to condemn a man for malice, but another to condemn him for fear. Yet the judgment was clear. The man who had set out to rid his parish of a ghost had, in the eyes of the law, become a murderer. And for that, he would hang. Shelley, whatever you just did made whatever you were going on worse.
My apologies.
That's all right. Well, whatever the man had set out to rid his parish of the ghost had, in the eyes of the law, become a murderer, and for that, he would hang. The judge wasted no time. The sentence was fixed by law. Smith was to be hanged by the neck until dead. His body would then be delivered to his surgeon for dissection, a final mark of disgrace meant to deter others. The words of the verdict still hung heavy in the chamber when the reaction began. Gasps had turned to murmurs, then to disbelief. Those who had crowded into the Old Bailey to witness justice carried out, now found themselves shaken. Still worse, Shelley. They had heard the same testimony the jury had, of the darkened lane, of the tales of the ghost, of the man who had fired the gun out of fear. Many in the gallery could not reconcile the image of Francis Smith, pale, bewildered, and trembling in the dock, with the punishment of death. Outside the courtroom, the sentiment only grew. Newspapers spread the story across London, and with it came sympathy for the condemned. Letters and conversations framed Smith less as a villain and more as another victim, not of the ghost, but of the hysteria it created. Some argued the parish itself bore blame. For weeks, they had sworn aloud that the ghost should be shot, and Smith had been the one fool enough or desperate enough to do it. This uproar was so pronounced that Lord Chief Baron MacDonald, the very judge who had pronounced the sentence, acted with startling speed. He knew the law had been applied as written, yet he also knew the punishment set uneasily with all who heard it. So within hours, he carried the matter far beyond the courtroom to a place almost unthinkable. By the same evening, the case of Francis Smith reached the desk of King George III. Now think of that for a moment. What began as frightened whispers of a ghost on the back lanes of Hammersmith had now traveled to the throne itself. The King of England, ruler of an empire stretched across the globe, was now asked to decide the fate of one customs officer who had fired a gun in the dark. That's freaking huge. Well, the royal command arrived swiftly, and it bore just 3 words: respite during pleasure. But those words thundered louder than the gunshot that had startled it all. Smith would not hang. Not yet, at least. His execution was halted, not by local mercy, but not by a London magistrate, but by the king himself. The effect was immediate. Relief washed over those who had followed the case, as though a collective breath had finally been released. He was to serve 1-year punishment instead. Now, a year could be survived. The noose could not. And so Francis Smith lived. A man who had gone out to rid his village of a ghost, who had stood condemned to death for killing his neighbor, was saved by the mercy of the crown. The case had traveled from the hedges of Hammersmith to the bench of the Old Bailey, and at last to the desk of the king himself, where mercy was granted. For weeks, the people of Hammersmith had lived under the shadow of a ghost. Fear had wound its way into every lane and cottage, shaping their nights, filling their taverns with rumor, and driving Francis Smith to the fatal shot. But in the weeks that followed his trial, a new revelation surfaced, one that unraveled the very ghost story in a way few expected. A local shoemaker named John Graham stepped forward. His name had never been whispered in connection with the haunting before, but his confession stunned the community. Graham admitted that he had been the so-called Hammersmith Ghost. The towering white figure that had so terrified the parish was, at least in part, his doing. His reason was not malice against the village, but revenge closer to home. Graham explained that his apprentices had been frightening his children with tales of the ghost, stories told to keep them awake at night. Tired of their behavior and eager to frighten them in return, he decided to disguise himself. Donning a sheet or cloth to cloak his body, he stalked the lanes after dark, looming pale and silent where he knew the boys might see him. What began as a prank aimed at teaching a lesson quickly spiraled into something much larger and far more dangerous. But by the time Graham confessed, the damage had been done. Thomas Millwood lay in a grave. Francis Smith had stood trial for murder, and the ghost had etched itself into London's collective memory. Graham's words explained some of the sightings, but not all of them. Other villagers swore the apparition had appeared in places Graham could not have been, and the choking attacks and terrifying encounters they remained difficult to square with his simple trick. Still, the shoemaker's confession gave the haunting a new face. Shelley, your audio's whack. Still, the shoemaker's confession gave the haunting a new face. The specter that had loomed over Hammersmith was not only a matter of restless spirits, but of flesh and blood, a human mischief feeding on fear. In Graham's prank, superstition had found substance, and hysteria had found its spark. John Graham's confession might have explained the ghost, but it did not kill the legend. If anything, it gave it new life. For many in Hammersmith, the idea that one man in a sheet could be responsible for the terror that had swept the parish felt too simple, too small to explain the fear that had gripped them. Besides, Graham's behavior only amounted to a misdemeanor nuisance under the law, and at the time, it wasn't something the courts would really want to pursue with the same intensity as the murder trial. It seems likely that, given the chaos the case had already caused, authorities were more interested in putting the matter to rest than dragging it back open over a prank. And so, since I myself was unable to find any court documents showing any charges or Graham being held for his play in the prank, the stories persisted. Yeah, that motherfucker was never charged.
Yeah, and I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, M. Night Shyamalan here. Did not see that coming. Children coming out of the field. Like,
Right.
whoa! What a left turn, 90 degrees sharp turn there. I love it.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
this would make a great movie. This would really make a great movie.
Wouldn't it though? Like for real, I feel like it's like Village meets, I don't know, the Lincoln
no,
Lawyer.
it really is. It's crazy, but like, looking at the whole story, I think the actions to put him on trial were justified. I don't think there's any question there. I'm surprised that they didn't try to do a plea deal to knock it down from murder to start with. I don't know.
Well, the judge was very on point. He said it is guilty, not guilty. That's it. You cannot have any in between because the law at that is how it was written.
Yeah, and and I get it. And in my eyes, I could have, being a juror, I could have put this either direction because, if you'd have come to me and said, well, we're asking the jury to come back with a lesser sentence because of the circumstances, I could have gone with that. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, in my mind, because I carry a firearm everywhere I go. First rule of firearm is don't point it at something you don't tend to kill and destroy.
That's right.
And the second one is, and this is even in hunting, is always identify your target.
Right.
I mean, if it's the ghost of this other dude, at least see his face and go, "You're the ghost of the other dude."
Yeah.
But
I get the whole. Okay, I get you have to go murder and guilty or not guilty. I get that. But I think that the jury actually tried to do this happy medium. But I'm going to tell you, this dude who went out trying to scare people, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think that it was one dude. Because you see, there's a very rapey quality to this whole thing. You're grabbing women in alleys. If he was just trying to scare his buddies, it wasn't just him.
Yeah.
And like you had said before, they were spotted in all different places. But if this guy walks forward and confesses that he is actually that first domino that falls, he has to have some kind of accountability. He has to.
Yeah.
Well, they could have used a common law statute where when a crime is committed or in the act of a criminal act, if someone is murdered, that charge can fall to the other person that assisted or participated, even if they weren't part of the original act. So
that's right, because you're the catalyst. You're the catalyst for you've dropped that first domino and you created this effect that rippled down to this man's ultimate demise. A person who was just going to work or just coming home from work.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And they never charged this guy?
Nope.
Yeah.
I mean,
but wait, it gets more interesting.
Oh, but wait.
Oh, please tell me more.
Yeah. When the years that followed, new accounts of the Hammersmith Ghost surfaced. By the 1820s, tales described a figure far more terrifying than Graham's pale disguise. Some swore the specter now breathed fire, its ghastly form blazing with an otherworldly fury. Others claimed it had grown stronger. no longer content to merely frighten travelers, but capable of striking them down. Each retelling made the ghost more fearsome, less like a man in a cloth and more like something truly unearthly. And the legend spread beyond Hammersmith. Newspapers and pamphlets carried the stories into London and from there into the wider imagination. The ghost became one of many figures in England's catalogue of night terrors, joining tales of spectres, witches, and phantoms that haunted lonely roads and graveyards. But as with all folklore, new fears eventually replaced old ones, and by the late 1830s, the Hammersmith ghost was eclipsed by another figure, the infamous Spring-Killed Jack. Where the ghost had lurked in graveyards and hedges, Jack leapt across rooftops and attacked in crowded streets, his legend more theatrical and sensational. And more on that, you can go listen to our episode over Spring-Killed Jack.
We've got one.
But London's appetite for the uncanny shifted, and the ghost of Hammersmith, though never forgotten, faded into the background of older tales. But still, the memory lingered. The story of the Hammersmith ghost might have faded completely into the realm of folklore, were it not for what followed in the courts. For while the ghost itself slipped back into rumor, the law did not forget. At its core, the case of Francis Smith asked a question the courts had never properly answered. What happens when a man kills in the genuine belief that he is preventing harm, but that belief turns out to be mistaken? Smith believed he was firing upon a ghost, an impossibility, but a belief he held with conviction. The jury recognized his fear, even tried to temper justice with manslaughter verdict, but the judge refused. He forced them to return murder or nothing. That rigidity revealed a gap in English law. There was no room for honest mistakes, no defense for a man who acted in good faith, but was wrong. And so the case haunted the courts for nearly 2 centuries. Legal scholars debated it, citing the Hammersmith ghost whenever the question of mistaken belief arose. For generations, it stood as a stark precedent that even if you act on what you think is true, if you are mistaken, the law may still hold you fully accountable. It was not until 1983, nearly 183 years after the shot on Black Lion Lane, that the law finally confronted the problem head on. The case was R.V. Williams. A man in London saw what he believed to be a youth assaulting someone on the street. Acting quickly, he intervened to stop what he thought was a crime. In doing so, he injured the boy, only to learn afterward that he had been mistaken. The assault he thought he saw was not an assault at all. The case went on to the Court of Appeal, and at its heart lay the same question raised by Hammersmith in 1804. What happens when someone acts in the honest belief that they are preventing harm, but that belief is wrong? Should the law judge them by the reality of the situation or by what they genuinely believe at the time? This time, the answer was different. The court ruled that what mattered most was not whether the belief was correct or even reasonable, but whether it was honestly held. If the person genuinely believed that they were preventing a crime, the law would allow that as a defense. And that ruling drew a straight, unbroken line back to Francis Smith. In 1804, he too believed with every fiber of his being that he was facing a threat. His mistake was not malice, but fear and conviction. Yet the law of his day gave no room for that distinction. He was condemned as a murderer, sentenced to death, and only saved by the king for firing what he thought was a ghost. So where Smith's trial revealed the gap, R.V. Williams finally closed it. The ghost of Hammersmith had never truly been laid to rest. For nearly 2 centuries, it lingered not in churchyards or hedges, but in the courtroom. A prank in a graveyard had sparked a killing on a winter's night, and that mistake bound itself to English law. Francis Smith's conviction exposed the silence in the system, and only R.V. Williams did the courts finally speak. And in that moment, the law itself seemed to acknowledge what Hammersmith had revealed so long ago. And that belief, even mistaken belief, can drive a man to act, and justice must reckon with that. Well, the Hammersmith ghost was never only about a figure in white. It was about what fear can do when it takes root, how whispers in taverns and hedges can swell until they change the course of a life. It was about a community that let superstition guide its nights, and a man who carried a gun into the dark believing he was confronting something beyond this world. Long after the case closed, the ghost never truly faded. Some say Thomas Millwood still lingers at the Black Lion pub, the place his body was carried after he was shot. Others say the ghost itself was never Graham in a sheet, but something older, something the villagers were right to fear. What's certain is that the story continues to breathe, not in the misty lanes of Hammersmith, but in the way we tell it, and in the uneasy silence that follows when the telling is done. Because a haunting doesn't always end with the grave. Sometimes it ends in a courtroom. Sometimes it ends in a precedent that outlives everyone involved. And sometimes, perhaps, it never ends at all. So ask yourself this. On those dark nights when the streets are quiet and the shadows stretch too long, did Hammersmith ever really lay its ghosts to rest? That, my friends, is the story of the Hammersmith Ghost.
If I was Thomas Millwood, I'd be lane.
You'd be what?
Haunting the hell out of that lane.
Oh, I would be too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is interesting on a couple of different levels. So, little insider. I bet y'all didn't know this, but I actually studied law for a little while.
What haven't you studied, Chad Wandell?
Me
So that
too,
was-
Chad.
You are
Let's
the
go.
geeks of geeks. Oh, wait, y'all, hold on, wait 1 second. Y'all go ahead.
So,
Yeah, I did a couple of pre-law classes. I didn't get too far because,
yeah,
I got
so
bored.
I did a little study, and so this was actually the secondary side of this kind of kicked in with American law. So one of the things that it kind of brought over in that case in the 80s was it put on trial the Americans' Good Samaritan rule, where like if a nurse or a doctor is out in the public, they witness somebody getting, having a heart attack or whatever, and they attempt life-saving actions or whatever, that person cannot be held responsible for
That's
not
right.
saving their life, or in some instances where you like. Spoiler alert,
Sometimes
if
the
you're
ribs
giving
are broken. Yeah.
Exactly. If you're doing CPR correctly, you're probably going to break a rib. So you can't be held liable for that. So our Good Samaritan laws actually got brought into question because of this law. And America went a different way. And it's kind of the little wrench in the story here is, when did our fella actually see a crime being committed that he thought he was saving someone from?
There you go. You have to remember, though, this is where it goes into allegedly this spirit was stalking this lane. Allegedly, he had already murdered a woman and had, and so this man takes it upon himself to patrol and to rid the lane of this nuisance.
You ready?
Right?
But allegedly, who was this spirit?
Unknown.
Well,
You
we
had
thought it
no-
was the Hammermill guy, right?
Well, first of all, we thought it was the guy who had unalived himself. And
Right.
now it becomes, the man who paid the price was Thomas Millwood.
Right. So, but the thing is
It's still a figure that you can't identify. I get where
Exactly.
you're going.
but at the same time, that's an alleged crime that no one is like, he didn't actually see that crime being committed. So it'd be like me walking past somebody on the street going, you know what? A blonde murdered somebody 6 weeks ago. It must be you. Bang, you're dead. He didn't
You'd
actually
never catch
witness
me
the
that easily,
engagement of
Chad Wandell.
I know. I've been chasing you for a while, Shelley.
I'm an elusive blonde child.
I know. But so in the sense that the rule still stands that if you believe you're actually intervening, key word there, intervening in the act of a crime, you cannot be held responsible because you thought that that was what was actually going on. And we actually had a trial like that here in the United States where a guy walked into a convenience store. The store was being robbed and he shot the two guys in the store. Turns out one of them was not part of it. But the guy put himself in a position to seem like he was part of it, and the guy had no idea, which again comes back to the laws that they put on us is always identify what's going on first. And if you don't know, don't. Like it's don't. But yeah, so that's kind of the thing is the guy never actually identified anybody committing a crime to intervene to.
I agree with you. And my biggest question comes in is how do you decide that you're going to get rid of a ghost? I've never seen a ghost that a gun, or not saying it can't happen because I don't know everything, a gun, a knife, or a stick would
Yep.
work on. So
Proton pack or nothing, baby.
that's
I was gonna
right.
say, you know what it is, Charlie? It's a proton pack.
That's
Duh.
right. So my question becomes is, whenever he saw something that appeared to be flesh and blood, even in his moment of panic, why in the world did he actually fire? And Ann Millwyn gave the testimony that there wasn't enough time to identify. This seemed to me to be a man that was overcome with fear, that was in that moment almost in shock and reacted rather than to stop and think. And the law did not allow for him to do that. The law did not allow for him to stop and think. It was either murder or it was not guilty. Guilty or not guilty was plain and simple. But in that moment, you cannot just thank God that because I think the man had the best of intentions. I think he was working, like you said, kind of off the Good Samaritan law. He was trying to keep his street safe, kind of like a janky neighborhood watch.
Yeah.
But I think he was acting, at least on his beliefs and his thoughts, in the best interest of the community, which was the woman had already been attacked and died, and her baby had died. There had been reports. I think that he turned into a one-man vigilante, which is never good. But his motivation in this case was correct to keep things safe. But his actions were wrong. Why don't you go try to tackle the ghost? If you think a gun will work, you should be able to tackle it. Go run at it. See what happens. Try less lethal force first.
Yeah. And I mean, I would be in that same boat that one, I guess I bring a little different experience to the table, having, being a paranormal investigator, that usually paranormal entities don't stick around. They just poof.
No.
And
boom.
so, like, if you're yelling at them, saying, hey, I'm going to beat your ass, turn around, I'm going to shoot you, turn around. Usually a ghost is going to give you the bird and vanish. But
yeah, gone.
But still, identify the target. Like, if you can't see this thing's face, keep getting closer, because you still have distance to your favor. Like, anybody that knows fighting and self-defense, distance is your friend.
That's right.
And he had plenty of it. And there's no excuse for not getting close enough to identify that target. Period.
Well, and on top of that, he's got like a musket at that point. I mean, he's gonna have to be relatively close. And somebody, I think it was Kate, that pointed out in the comments, he shot him in the mouth.
Yeah.
He was that was close to him.
Either that or it was just a really lucky, random, off the wall shot that just happened to connect in the right spot with an instant, kill.
And it could have been, but 1800s muskets were far more accurate than 1700 and 1600s muskets.
Yeah, that's true.
True. So, but the thing that we don't take in consideration is, what if he had missed and that shot went through a window and hit somebody? Would we still be having the same conversation? Because he did this act in this, I'm trying to protect my community, but I have blatant disregard for the safety of said community while firing a musket at an unknown object.
Right. He fired a musket at something. If it was a ghost, that it would have gone through. Okay. He immediately actually put the community at risk. But again, I have to fall on the side of, unfortunately, what was the gentleman's name? It's escaping me, Blake.
Which one that shot the ghost?
Yes.
Francis Smith.
Francis Smith. I kind of have to go on his side if I'm going to argue it. He was out there to protect his community. Other people had been afraid and they'd stopped. I mean, a woman had died, and in shock in the moment, I think he believed he was doing the right thing. Why a gun was involved, I have no idea. That's where that goes wrong in all different directions. But I think that his motives were true. So if I was on the jury, I would have been okay with returning manslaughter. But at the end of the day, a man still ain't dead. So I guess it is black and white letter of the law. It's murder.
I mean, to say you don't have that option to return manslaughter.
I don't.
And see, and I'd have been in the same boat but me, I'm kind of the prick in the jury that says, fine, if I have to return a verdict, he's not guilty now. So I'm not going to send a guy to the gallows for a mistake. I don't think the justice fits the price, right? I don't believe the intent was murder. And what is the number one thing in law?
Intent. Mm-hmm.
And that's even in English law, intent.
But is the intent... Okay, wait, hold on.
Criminal intent matters.
Okay, and I understand that. But here's my question, though, is where I get really interested with this is that, okay, take logic out of it. We know that a gun's not going to take down a ghost. We understand that. We get that. But in his mind, his intent is to shoot and quote unquote kill this thing, to take it down.
Correct.
So therefore, is his intent not murder, even though it is a ghost, and then by chance he just happens to kill Thomas instead of the ghost?
Then
And
I have to
that's
throw
where
out, can you kill something that's already dead? And in that case, the motive cannot be death because you cannot kill something that's already dead. So take away the murder aspect. He was actually thinking he was ridding the area of something that was not living to begin with. So
But
then we
in
get into a
his
whole
mind,
question.
but in
You're
his
right.
mind, he's going out saying, "We're going to shoot this thing down.
Right.
We're going
I
to
don't
kill
disagree
it."
with you. But then the question legally becomes, can you kill something that's already dead? If
But
I walk up
but
and I
we're
shoot
not. But
someone
no, no,
who's
no,
sitting
no,
in a
no, no,
car
no,
that's
no.
been stabbed to death. Wait a minute, let me make my point. There's a guy sitting in a car that's been stabbed to death. Okay, he's already dead. I walk up and I shoot that. Am I guilty? That man? Am I guilty of murder? No, I'm guilty of abuse of a corpse because it's not murder because somebody was already dead. So were we arguing the murder? Because no, in that case, the spirit that they were hunting was technically already dead. So
But y'all just said though that this comes down to intent. His
agreed. And this is why
intent is
he
to
went to
go
murder.
out and kill something.
Right. So the trick of the question here is he didn't intend to murder him.
Right.
yes, Thomas
So
Millwood. He did
that's
not
exactly
intend to
it.
murder Thomas
But
That's
Millwood.
his
exactly it.
intent was to kill, unalive, exercise,
Remove.
whatever you want to
Yeah.
call the
Remove
thing.
whatever. Yes.
But
Something
he
that
went about it in
wasn't
Old
alive to
West
begin with.
fashion.
Right, but I think that I think the fact that it wasn't alive to begin with
It's
cannot be
irrelevant.
it's irrelevant in this situation, because if we're talking about trying to convict a man on what he did, what was his overall intent? You grab a gun to take something down. We're going to shoot it down. Those are the words that's being used by the community. In
Right.
other words, you're going to kill it. You're
And he's
going
under
to
the
kill it.
assumption-
Your intent is, if I fire a gun, it is going to unalive something. Therefore, my intent is to go out and unalive something. Therefore, that's my intent. The fact that it's already dead is irrelevant.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's already dead, because they have a belief that this thing is haunting the village, and the only way to stop it is to take it down or shoot it down or unalive it, even though it's already dead. We get that it's already dead. But in this instance, we're talking about intent on the necessary process of making getting a conviction. It falls back to what was his intent. His intent was that night to go out with a rifle and, quote unquote, take something down or unalive it. The fact that it's a ghost is irrelevant. It's his intent.
Yeah.
But as his attorney, I think I could argue that in that point. Yeah, okay.
Let's go. Here we go. Let's
She
see what
said, as his attorney.
I think I could argue the point that at that time, the only way that they could consider or know how to remove something from their community would be to unalive it, right? They aren't taking consideration the fact that so they were using the tools that they had available and their knowledge at the time in their phraseology of how they were going to rid themselves of this community.
Well, that is very unfortunate for your client.
No,
Yeah,
I mean,
because your client had access to all sorts of spiritual means to get advice, and he did not.
Did he though? We don't know if he was a spiritual man. Do not make assumptions about my client, sir.
Really?
Yeah.
I think. Listen, I too, even saying all that, I too would have a hard time returning a verdict of murder in this case, because this is a community that is gripped by fear right now. They wholeheartedly believe that something is haunting them to a point of killing people. So their belief, and see, that's where I go back to the intent, though, because their belief is, if it can, I guarantee you, they're sitting there thinking, if it can touch you, if it can strangle you, we don't know what he thought it was. He can say, I thought it was a phantom. I thought it was a phantom. Okay, phantom is the definition given because it's all dressed in white. Does he think that it's a man or a person because it can choke and kill and do all of this stuff? What does he think it is? That's where I go back to the intent. I still would return and not guilty, in my opinion. I would have a hard time. I would struggle. I would try to go for manslaughter along with the rest of the jury. And then I'm kind of like Chad. If I had to choose, I'm going to be a dick and say, well, fine, fuck it, not guilty, because I can't convict him of murder, because this is unfortunately a horrible accident, a horrible tragedy that took place. Gripped by hysteria and fear, armed with a gun in the dead of night, your senses are heightened, fear takes over, your brain doesn't process correctly to check what you're just going to fire and shoot because you're standing in front of something that has killed something before. So at that point, it is me or you. And if I have a gun and I'm in fear of my life that much, that I feel like I'm self-defense all the way. I mean, if something's happening to me and I fear for my life and my safety, self-defense all the way. Yeah, so I would have a real hard time returning a guilty verdict.
I'm surprised his lawyers actually didn't pursue that legal line more, that this was an act of self-defense, not for himself only, but for his town. Like the fact that they didn't even go for that, just because that would have been my go. If I was his attorney, that'd have been my route as well. It's like he was acting in self-defense. He had found the thing that was, accused of killing people and harassing people, potentially near raping them or whatever, that he was in the heat of the moment. The thing would not respond, and dead men tell no tales. At that point, he charged me. Like, Jesus Christ, come on.
That is a really good point that just got put in the comments. Not guilty by reason of insanity. His emotions took over his ability to think clearly. I get where they're going with that. I know that you have to. I know you have to actually be declared insane.
Yeah.
There's a whole medical legal process to that. I get where she's going with that. That's actually a really good way to kind of look at it.
The Son of Sam, perfect case to go look at, where a spiritual insanity charge was used.
Yeah. Well,
gentlemen,
final notes.
Final thoughts.
Shelley, Chad, we're going to start with you, our guest co-host tonight.
Are we going guilty or innocent? And your final thoughts on this case?
The letter of the law puts him guilty, flat out. Puts him guilty.
Okay.
With death being the only option, I can't do that. I can do something in the middle, but I can't put a man to death for the circumstances of this case.
Yeah.
Okay. Blake?
I would agree. I'm along the same lines of Chad. I would have a hard time returning guilty with a sentencing, knowing that the sentencing was death or the gallows, and then to be dissected. That's just crazy. I would have gone with the jury and tried for manslaughter. We wouldn't have had an option. It would have had the same outcome regardless, because the law was written as the law is written. That's why it took 183 years to change. And it makes me wonder how many more people fell to that law and got charged with murder and were found guilty because the law had a gap in it for 183 years. Or there has to be more cases. So I feel for those people. I feel for Francis Smith. I feel for Thomas Millwood in this instance. I think it was just a very unfortunate, tragic accident. And if I had to, I would be a dick and be like, fine, fuck it, not guilty. And it would just be a hung jury, I guess. I don't know.
So, gentlemen, here's the thing. I think at the end of the day, we all agree. I definitely could not sentence a man to death if he was truly frightened, truly acting in good faith, the motive, the intent. He was acting in good faith, that he was ridding this town of a nuisance and of a terror that had been terrorizing people for, months and perhaps years. Now, the guy who was actually started this bullshit, guilty.
Yeah.
Guilty. Adios, muchacho, you are going away. But at the end of the day, I would not be able to convict a man who, at the core of his intention, it was honest, right, and good. So I would have to say not guilty. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
Woo, that was a little bit of a humdinger to end on. Jesus, God, I knew this. I knew we were going to discuss pretty good on the case. All right, sounds good. Got a few announcements. Here we go. Listen up. We've added a couple of new things to these sign-off announcements. So if you want to support the show directly, check out our Patreon page. That is patreon.com/EVP podcast. For just $5 a month, you'll unlock over 450 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast, which I did 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast. So you're getting an additional hour with us each week. Your support from this goes directly back to the show and towards the adventures that we bring you week after week. And if you are not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. Make sure you stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal and looking for the green sound wave. And remember, you can catch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. If you'd like to meet us in person and come hang out, your choices, they're balancing. I'm not going to say they're dwindling. I'm not going to say they're quite going up yet. September 27th, we will be in Independence, Missouri at the Masonic Temple with Epic VIP Events LLC with the mysterious Mike and Sam for the Parathon with Johnny Hauser, Josh Hurd, Stephanie O'Reilly, Tori Westhoff, and many more. That event is 18 and up only. Tickets for that can be purchased online at Eventbrite. bright through the mysterious Mike and Sam. Then October 18th, we will be partnering with the Gray County Historical Museum in Longview, Texas to lead their annual Haunted Walk downtown, where we lead you around and tell you all the stories why downtown Longview, Texas is so haunted. And afterwards, we'll be leading an investigation on the inside of the Gray County Historical Museum. And tickets for that are currently on sale. They went on sale last Tuesday, so head on over and get your tickets for that. And then check out the Gray County Historical Museum's Facebook page to be able to get tickets for their Haunted Walk. November 22nd, we will be at the KMFA Austin studio in Austin, Texas for the Strange and Extraordinary Fest 2025 with the Theories of Third Kind podcast, Indie Parahouse, Night Owl podcast, Brandon Hodge, and of course our good friends Damian Shalacy and Nicole Ricardo with the Parapeculiar Museum of Haunted Items. Tickets for that can be purchased at strangeandextraordinaryfest.com. We do have one more possible appearance in Texas. We are waiting for some confirmation, and we'll let you know about that once we confirm those details. Make sure you subscribe to our Eventbrite page to be notified when public investigation tickets go on sale. We still have one ticket available and left for the 2-night event at the Old Park Hotel. Here's your owner right here. Mr.
Go buy that
John
ticket. Shit's getting crazy at the hotel.
That is going to be October 10th, 11th weekend. It'll be a 2-night, and but like I said, there is still one available. To make all of this easier, we've added all these links to our link tree, which will be on the Everything Vaguely Paranormal Facebook and X profiles Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, as well as in all of our show notes for you audio listeners. Or you can search linktr.ee/Everything Vaguely Paranormal. We are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps the adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends. One of the easiest things you can do to help out our show and its rankings, if you have a Spotify account, head over there and simply download our episodes and leave us a review. That is it. Also on Apple Pods or wherever you get your podcasts, that'll help. If you have a story, comment, or question, or you'd like to be a guest on the show or have us as guests on your show, email us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. And please hit that thumbs up button. Let us know you were here.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, we thank y'all for joining us for another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I want to give a moment shout out to our guest co-host tonight, Mr. Chad Waddell with Ghost Geeks. Owner of the Old Park Hotel with his wife, Leslie Wandell. Shout out, Leslie. We love you too. And we'll hopefully be seeing you real soon. But for myself, I am Blake Smith. My partners in the paranormal tonight, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Chad Wandell. We love y'all. The fake Mike Ryan. We love y'all. Thank y'all so much. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye.
Bye-bye.